Obamacare and repealing Obamacare is once again the news today. I say the news because I shouldn't say the news because there's too much news. In fact, Tom Benson, there's too much to manage. Today was one of those days where I was like going through everything that was going on in the world and things I want to talk about and things I want to say, things about the culture we're going to get into and things about politics we're going to get into. And this is one of those days where I'm like, man, sometimes it is really tough to manage everything that is going on.
Put the best stuff up first.
Well, yeah, that's what you have to do. I mean, that's how radio is. You want to be able to get all of it in, and you realize you can't. I mean, but not only that, I have to know about all this stuff.
Wow.
I have to know about everything that's going on, and it's tough, especially since I, produce another show, and, I have a life outside of radio.
You do?
Yeah, believe it or not. But this is, I mean, just a little recap of what's going on in the world today.
Okay.
And we're going to get to a lot of this. The first thing I'm going to talk about, obviously, is there is a new compromise of repealing Obamacare and replacing it out there. So we're going to talk about that. We have North Korea still saber rallying, saying they would preemptively strike us with nukes and kill us. So that's good. We have so much about Iran because there's talk about the Iran deal and how the Trump administration is saying, well, they are living up to their side of the bargain, which is very interesting. But now they're kind of walking that back and really criticizing Iran.
What I saw was they were not living up to the spirit of the agreement.
Yes, and we're going to get into that because they really aren't. They really aren't. And Marco Rubio actually made a good point on that. So we have to talk about that. There's a whole big debate about H-1B1 visas that I was going to get into, but we're probably just not going to have any time. There's the whole thing about the Berkeley campus, how they had to shut down Ann Coulter's event because they're afraid of they're afraid of security. And I have an article here about another thing about some group at some college campus doesn't want some conservative to speak because of all this stuff. And what they said is just beyond reason. So I'm going to get to that in the second hour.
Wow.
This isn't even. You have Jeff Sessions, who's at the border today.
Right now.
He's at the border right now. You have Jeff Sessions, who's saying if you are illegal, you can be deported, which apparently it's a controversial statement, but not really. You have the leader of the Democrat Party right now saying basically their new campaign slogan against Republicans is they don't give a you-know-what about people. And we're going to talk about that later. Elizabeth Warren has a new book out. We have to talk about that. See all this stuff? I haven't even gotten to everything. There's still talk about tax reform.
Elizabeth Warren was on The View today, by the way.
Oh, lovely. And then we've already forgotten. I haven't even mentioned the latest with the Bill O'Reilly thing. He's leaving. The whole debate about that.
$25 million is to go out the door?
Yeah, exactly. There's some big settlement there. What's the future of Fox News? What's going on in the Murdoch family? What's the future of conservatism and conservative media and all this? Where could Bill O'Reilly go?
Nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, nobody could afford him.
Not only that, they don't want the bad rep that comes with him.
Yeah.
Right away, anybody hires him, they're going to get Hear From Now and all the other women who don't like what happened.
Yeah. So that's everything going on. There's a lot more than that. I didn't even mention local stuff.
I think we just covered it. Let's go home.
I mean, it's hard to manage some days.
Yeah, sure.
And when I do this show, and by the way, if you don't know what this show is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, your humble host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. That is Tom Benson producing. If you want to call, if you're listening to the live show, we're doing it till 9 p.m. tonight. You can call 407-916-5400 or text to 23680. When I do this show, I really want to get into the stuff and really know what I'm talking about and know what's going on. And, man, it's hard to manage. This is just an honest opinion by me. It is hard to manage sometimes to do that. And I'm the kind of person who believes that I'm not the kind of person who's arrogant enough to believe I know everything. I have such a curious mind that I really want to know the truth. I believe I need to know more. I need to know more. I need to be smarter. I need to be smarter. I need to do more research. I need to do more research. And there's just not enough time in the day to do it all. So the first thing I want to talk about, by the way, how are you, Tom Benson?
I'm doing fine, getting ready for Earth Day.
Oh, you are?
Yes, I
you
am.
You got your lawnmower ready.
That's right.
You're going to mow the grass and do all that stuff.
Go hug a tree somewhere.
Yeah, we talked about Earth Day in yesterday's show, and that got a lot of attention. So if you missed yesterday's show, check out the podcast, BeyondReasonRadio.com and the Beyond Reason Radio app. Yeah, there's still stuff going on about that. So it's just crazy. But the big thing I want to start with today, we're going to start with some Beyond Reason politics. In the second hour, I have to talk more about some cultural things, especially with what's going on in the universities. But it was released today by Politico that the Republicans, the moderate Republicans, and the Freedom Caucus have sort of come up with a deal in terms of what the new health care plan will look like. And basically what it is, well, before I get to that, Donald Trump talked about this today, and he was talking about how, health care the debate was never really over. Actually, it was said earlier that you were going to move on to tax reform. Then you went back to health care because your poll numbers went down. But anyway, he said it was never really over, and we're going to have a great deal. This is what he said.
The plan gets better and better and better, and it's gotten really, really good. And a lot of people are liking it a lot. We have a good chance of getting it soon. I'd like to say next week, but it will be, I believe we will get it. And whether it's next week or shortly thereafter, this is a great bill. There's a great plan, and this will be great health care. It's evolving. You know, there was never a give up.
Oh, it's evolving. So that's good. But anyway, what's happening is there is a deal sort of in the works behind the scenes of what the new health care bill will look like. And basically what it's going to look like, according to the compromise, is this. You have the essential health benefits. That was one thing that the Freedom Caucus didn't like because the federal government was mandating insurance companies to provide certain things. And really what that was doing is it was upping the cost of healthcare too much. And it was a top-down approach, and the Freedom Caucus wanted to get rid of that. And I completely understand that. I completely understand why they would want to get rid of that, because it was raising the cost of healthcare. And if the goal is to lower the cost of healthcare, then you can't keep that. So what this new plan would do, it's an amendment that they added to the bill that basically says states can apply for exemptions from it. So if there are certain states that don't want to keep, so they would keep the federal mandate, or it would be the federal standard is what they're calling it. But if the states don't like those standards, they could apply for an exemption from it. And they could apply for an exemption from some of the pre-existing condition rules. Now, granted, when you actually look at what the amendment says, and it's just a summary that's out there right now. It's not, Politico had it first, everyone else is picking it up. It's not legislation, it's just a proposed amendment. They wanted to get it out there. When you look at it, they have to apply for it.
Who's they? The people or the
states?
Okay.
The states have to apply for it, and then the federal government has to approve it. Mm-hmm. So who knows if the federal government would approve it, and there's still some mandates that would have to go into it. But this is sort of the compromise that's being thrown out there. Representative Mark Meadows, who's the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, and Representative Tom MacArthur, co-chairman of the Centrist Tuesday group, are nearing a deal on changes to the bill. This is according to The Hill. And the White House is eager for a victory before President Trump's 100th day in office. But GOP aides and some lawmakers say it seems doubtful that the deal, as presented by MacArthur, could win approval.
That would be quick.
Yeah.
We're at day 91 now, I think.
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I mean, they're on recess right now. They're supposed to come back very soon. But what's happening, the changes being discussed would allow states to apply for waivers to a core Obamacare provision. known as community rating, that stops insurance companies from raising premiums based on individuals' health, as long as the states also offered high-risk pool coverage. And then it also would allow Obamacare's requirements that insurers offer certain benefits. It would allow states to be able to waive that, but they have to apply for that. The problem with this is not even what the Freedom Caucus really wants. This is not really a full repeal of Obamacare, which is what a lot of conservatives, what a lot of Republicans wanted. That's why they voted for the Republicans in office. It's still not really that. But even with this, which is at least a little bit of a step in the right direction, just a little teeny bit, there are a bunch of moderates, Republicans in the Senate, in the House, who say they don't want it. In fact, MacArthur, who's a centrist, says centrists were fleeing that bill as it moved towards a vote. He says, I wouldn't be surprised if they started to lose more moderates because of the new changes. So we actually are going towards more of a conservative solution, a Rand Paul type solution, and the moderates are fleeing it. Why is this happening? Well, I'll tell you why it's happening. It's happening because we made the mistake as conservatives of believing that just because the Republicans own the House and the Republicans own the Senate and the Republicans own the presidency, that Republican somehow equals conservative. We are learning the hard way right now that Republican does not equal conservative. In fact, there are way too many Republicans in there that are not conservative. So, and one of the biggest problems, unfortunately, and I warned you about this with Donald Trump. A lot of you like Donald Trump. I've actually liked a lot of what he's done lately. But he is not a conservative on a lot of issues, and he is not a conservative on this issue.
He's a deal maker.
He's a deal maker. So he's trying to make a deal here, which is hard to do because conservatives really want to repeal Obamacare. It's what was promised. So what we have, for those conservatives out there who really believe it could be possible that Obamacare is really going to be repealed and it's going to be replaced with a free market solution, getting the government out of the way, it's seeming more and more likely that that's not going to happen. Because we have way too many moderates in there who don't want to do it because they've bought into the premise of the Democrats that it's the role of government to take care of people's health. Mm-hmm. We've already bought into that premise. We're all socialists now when it comes to health care. Let's face it, that's where we're headed. So they bought into that premise, and I'm going to get into a little bit that in the next segment and later in this hour because you have Elizabeth Warren and you have the Democrats already going down that road that Republicans, it's the typical thing, but they're going back to it. Republicans don't care about people. They don't care about the middle class. They don't care about the individual. They don't care about your health. So they say stuff like that. The moderate Republicans who don't have a spine just, they're right. I'm going to lose my vote. Oh, no. We can't look insensitive. And then you have Donald Trump, who should be the leader of the conservative movement. He's the leader of the Republican Party right now. And all he wants on this issue is a win. That's all he wants. He wants some kind of change because he promised it in the campaign before his 100 days, and he can just stamp it and say, I got this win. I don't think he really even cares what's in it as long as he gets some kind of compromise and he gets the win. That's one of the unfortunate things that happens when you vote for a Republican president who really doesn't have core conservative convictions, especially on this issue. That's what happens because you expect him to be the leader on this, and he's not. Now, Mike Pence is more conservative than Trump. He is apparently working with Congress to get this stuff done, but Mike Pence isn't the president, and Mike Pence is going to go along with what the president says, and he is even kind of caving on a lot of this. So when I look at this, the main lesson of what's going on with healthcare here, and we're going to have the same problem with tax reform. Once healthcare is done, we're going to have the same problem with tax reform because There are real things that need to be done to cut taxes, especially like the corporate income tax. But there are too many moderates in the Republican Party, because remember, Republican does not equal conservative, especially right now. These moderates are not going to like a lot of those tax reforms because they're going to once again be defensive against the Democrats, and they're going to buy into the premise that the Republicans don't care about people. Republicans, all they do is care about the rich, the usual stuff. And instead of going on the offensive and saying we care about people, we want to make health care affordable again, they're not going to do it. So this is where that divide is. Because a lot of people are confused. They see what's going on in Congress. They say, oh, we own the House, we own the Senate, we own the presidency, we even own the judiciary in terms of the Supreme Court anyway. And yet we can't get anything done. That's because we believe the lie that Republican equals conservative. And I'm not hopeful about this anymore. I've been worried about this really since the primary, about this issue. Trump kind of got on board with it later, and he's just not convicted on this issue. He just wants to get it over with and get the win and move on to trade and other things. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. So the Democrats, in response to all this, they a lot of them are still going anti-Trump, which is not going to help them. It's not going to help them win. They tried to do it in Georgia. They spent a ton of money, and he still didn't win. He did better than they thought, but he still didn't win. But there are some things the Democrats are starting to do that is going to be more effective, and the Republicans and conservatives have to be ready to fight against it. And we're going to get to that and a lot more to get to, especially in this hour, a lot of politics to get to. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. I'm joined by Tom Benson producing, and we've been talking about some Beyond Reason politics and what's going on in the Republican Party, making a lot of people, a lot of conservatives upset because this should have been done very quickly. It was the number one issue for a lot of conservatives because they see the effects of it in our economy. And yet we can't get together because the Senate, the moderates, they're scared of the message that the Democrats are going to have. And Republican does not equal conservative. And we're finding this out the hard way. It really does not equal conservative right now. So in response to all this, you have the Democrats. And some of them are getting a little beyond reason, a little crazy. And one of those people is Tom Perez. Tom Perez is now the new DNC chairman. And he's been on a little tirade lately. And this is what he said at a rally about Donald Trump and Republicans. Okay, that was really hard to hear, but he basically said Donald Trump doesn't give a blank about people. Starts with an S, just so you know. Really difficult to hear. And he was also at a GOP, he was at a rally with Bernie Sanders, I believe, in Maine, and he said the same thing. He said, they don't give a blank about voters. He says Republican leaders and President Trump don't give a blank about the people they were trying to hurt. So this is the selling point to them now. The Republicans, they just don't care, which isn't true, obviously. And by the way, they're still on the Russia thing. All over that rally, they were talking about he's in bed with the Russians. Yeah, okay. They are definitely not going to let that go. In fact, when I get to the Elizabeth Warren interview, I didn't get any of the audio of this, but literally the first 10 minutes when she was on with Rachel Maddow yesterday was about the Russia stuff. I mean, Rachel Maddow apparently talks about it every day, I guess. It's her thing now. She is obsessed with that issue. But here's another thing that Tom Perez said at the rally in Maine. Play cut 2 for me.
They call their budget a skinny budget. I call their budget a shitty budget because it doesn't treat people well.
It doesn't treat people well. It's a blank budget. Oh, lots of class. Lots of class. You know, this is the Democrat Party that says Donald Trump doesn't have any class.
Yeah.
And then they do stuff like that.
So much for civility.
Yeah, that's gone. That is gone, Tom Benson. I hate to tell you. On both sides, really. But so now they're on this whole mantra, and it's the whole same argument that if you cut government and you cut government spending and you lower taxes and you get government out of your life, that somehow means that you don't care about people. And that's because, as many of you know, the left, they believe that the only way to truly care about people is through the government, through government programs and government spending.
What's the biggest lie out there ever? I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Exactly right.
Ronald
Reagan said that back in the day. And it's so true. And people who have to deal with the government a lot kind of know this. So when they say, all Republicans don't care about people, well, obviously they do. Not all of them. But the whole point is they listen to voters who are business owners, who are entrepreneurs, who are raising a family maybe, who are church leaders. And all these people want, is for the government to get out of their way. And the Republicans should go on the offensive and say, we care about those people. But what happens too much is that these moderate Republicans, just like they're doing with health care, just like they're going to do with tax reform, and it's happening with the whole H-1B1 thing, because there are some valid points about the H-1B1 visa thing, because it's been overly abused. A lot of the stuff has been a lie, that terms we have to have those workers because Americans won't take those jobs. That's absolutely not true at all. Americans are trying to get those jobs and they can't.
Tell that to the Disney workers who had to train their replacements.
Yeah, exactly. So that's definitely a lie. But it goes to the whole other extreme that we should have no H-1B1 visas, and we should limit the businesses from being able to hire people from overseas so much. And then we have to buy American. That's Trump's saying. We have to buy American because that helps American workers. And when someone comes along and say, well, we still believe in the free market. We still believe a business should be able to, do stuff. If it's better for their business, they could hire someone who's really professional overseas. Or if it's better for their business, they should have the freedom to buy imported goods. And, if the government can save taxpayer money, maybe sometimes they should use imported goods instead of buying American. The whole mantra continues again. Oh, Republicans don't care about people. Conservatives don't care about people. Although they do. They care about the freedom of the individual and the freedom of the business owner. So it's definitely a balance there. But it's the same thing here. And we're going to get into Elizabeth Warren. She has a new book out. She had an interview with Rachel Maddow. I wanted to play a couple cuts from that. She definitely said some things that were beyond reason because, it's Elizabeth Warren, so that's what she does. But she also goes along this similar line that Republicans don't care about the middle class, that the Republicans don't care about the poor, that the Republicans don't care about people. This is the new Democrat line, that Republicans don't give a blank about people. Now we have to see how the Republicans will respond. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Download the iHeartRadio app and catch the Beyond Reason Radio podcast. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Well, it looks like we have a caller who wants to comment on, what's going on with, the repeal of Obamacare, Trump care as it is, and the Republicans in Congress. And, we're talking to Doug in Winter Haven. Welcome to Beyond Reason Radio, my friend. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fine, Yaffee. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Listen, Yaffee, this whole healthcare racket, and that's what it is.
Yes.
Yeah, this whole healthcare racket is making financial slaves out of Americans.
You have to elaborate a little bit for me.
Well, I know people personally who pay much, much more for health care than they do their mortgage.
I know people personally that do too. I actually do have some friends who have told me the same thing.
And they've got the whole population just terrified of getting sick and not being taken care of and so forth. But if you have a decent job, after you pay your taxes and your health care and your mortgage and your utilities and your food, never mind, there's nothing left. There just isn't enough to cover all those things.
That's very true, and wages have been pretty stagnant.
Yeah. So it's nothing more than a racket, and they, like I say, they're turning this whole nation into financial slaves. And if they can't get this thing fixed in Washington, they need to go home and stay home. We should re-elect no one until the people that go up there can get this mess straightened out.
Yeah, and Doug, I appreciate your call. It makes a lot of good points. And the whole thing is, the reason why it's getting so expensive is because of government involvement. The government gets more and more involved, and the prices have just gone up and up and up. So what's going to happen, though, is the Democrats are going to say, well, the government needs to be more involved. And we often want to go to Washington to fix things, when often we just need Washington to get out of the way. But anytime I say something like that, of course, then you have people like Tom Perez who just says, I don't give a blank about people.
That's right.
Yaffee doesn't give a blank about people because he wants the government to get out of the way. I know people, like he just said, who are paying more for their health care premiums than their mortgage. What's the point in having it at that point? And with the high deductibles and everything, it's almost pointless to even have it. It's ridiculous. And this has all gotten worse under Obamacare. I care about people, and that's why I want it to change. That's what the Republicans need to say now. Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, disagrees with me, obviously. She's a big progressive, socialist. Democrat senator. She was on the Rachel Maddow show yesterday, and she's had some interesting comments. And I can't play all of them. But she basically was asked, why do you think Donald Trump won? This is what she said.
Part of it is an ugly stew of racism.
Oh, of course.
Part of it is Donald Trump tapped into anger. He got that people are deeply angry. They are angry that their kids can't graduate from school without getting crushed by student loan debt. Angry.
Why do you think they're angry? What happened in the last 8 years?
Well, exactly.
Gee whiz. I'm sorry, I couldn't contain myself.
That there aren't good jobs being created right here. Angry that after a lifetime of working hard, you can't retire with a little dignity and security. And people are right to be angry. But Donald Trump said it's their fault. Those other people, those people who don't worship like you, those people who don't look like you, those people aren't the same color issue.
Geez.
That was a big part. He told a story. It's just the wrong story. Donald Trump promised. He said, you elect me, and I'm going to get out there, and I'm going to work for you. And look at what he's done.
Okay, so she's saying, of course, that, well, Donald Trump just went up there and blamed blacks and different races, stewed racism for all the problems in our country. Actually, no. What was one of Donald Trump's main slogans? His main one was Make America Great Again. But what was one of his other main slogans? Drain the swamp. Who was that directed towards? It wasn't directed towards blacks. It was directed towards Washington and the corruption in Washington. And his whole point was talking about getting the corruption in Washington out of the way. What was his other main slogan? America first. Talking about, well, we need to take care of our country first because those in Washington have not been taking care of the people of this country. And that's what was effective. And he even went to black communities and said, look what the Democrats have done for you over the last few decades. It hasn't worked. It hasn't helped you. So why not give me a chance and I'll work for you? Is that racist? No, but it's always construed back to racism. If anything, the Trump supporters were upset at Washington more than anybody because they felt Washington was no longer working for the people, no longer working for the American people. They were too busy working for, a lot of them were upset at them working for the big corporations, believe it or not, which is a big Democrat thing. But they believed that they were too busy working for themselves than working for what's best for the people. That's a big reason why he won. And, of course, it was against globalization as well, working for other countries rather than our own. Now, Elizabeth Warren continues on here with Trump, and Trump cares, what she calls it, which is kind of what I called it, but here it is.
He embraced this idea that the way we're going to move this country forward, the way we're going to reform health care, is we're going to knock 24 million people out of health care coverage. We're going to raise the cost of health insurance for a whole lot of middle-class families. And why? So they could deliver a tax cut for a handful of millionaires and billionaires. This isn't about what Donald Trump says. This is about what Donald Trump does. And he's delivering one hit after another on working families.
Premiums are already skyrocketing for working families right now under Obamacare. Okay? So we say, well, Donald Trump wants to kick them off their coverage, and Donald Trump wants to raise prices and raise premiums for working families. No, that's already happening.
Does she really believe this, or is she just preaching to the choir?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, a lot of this is typical leftist stuff. Yeah. I mean, it is. The Republicans don't care about people. They just care about the rich and tax breaks for the rich, and that's why they do this. Except, like I said, I told you before, and that caller was telling you before, and I talk to people all the time about this, it's not the rich who are being affected by Obamacare. The rich don't care about Obamacare. I think the insurance companies are too upset about Obamacare. They're making tons of money off of it. Now, they're off. Actually, that's not true. They're actually losing a lot of money, and that's why they're pulling out of a lot of areas. They thought they were going to make a ton of money off of it because of the mandate, but then ended up backfiring. No, it's the government regulations that have caused healthcare premiums to skyrocket to the point where middle-class families can no longer afford it. So a lot of them, they try to go on Obamacare because it's the law and it's too expensive, so they just don't have healthcare. Some of them are forced to go on Medicaid, and they really don't want Medicaid. So there's just, and then she talked about, well, in the first cut, the American people are angry, and Donald Trump tapped into that anger. Well, what caused a lot of those problems? She talked about, well, they're angry because they can't pay off their student loans. Student loans are completely under Obamacare. They nationalized the student loan industry, basically. That's a government problem. Most of these universities that people go to that people can't afford to pay off are public universities heavily subsidized by the government, by state governments, by the federal government. So she never talks about the problem. Who really cares about people? The Democrats or the Republicans? And I say Republicans with a little bit of trepidation because there are too many moderate Republicans out there that are just buying into the Democrat premise. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. I want to talk about a little bit about North Korea and the whole Iran situation and what we can learn from that. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Listen to the latest episodes of Beyond Reason. Download the podcast at Spreaker.com. The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit of culture and faith in the next hour. We are on till 9 p.m. tonight, so you want to join me for the entire show. If you miss any of the show, check out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. Just download the Beyond Reason Radio app. That's the easiest way to do it, and you can catch it there, or it's on the iHeartRadio app, iTunes, all of the places you can think of. So we're kind of wrapping up this hour, because this hour has been all about politics, because there's so much politics going on. I frankly didn't have enough time to get to all of it. But one thing that is going on that has definitely been making headlines this week has been that the Trump administration and Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State especially, came out and said that Iran they have lived up to their end of the bargain when it comes to the nuclear deal. They say, oh, well, it's okay. They've actually led up to it, so this might be go down the direction, open the door to get rid of some of the sanctions that were put on there. Now, this is a little bit of a reversal because they are still doing ballistic missile tests with nuclear-capable missiles, and they're still testing those, and they were saying, well, we can have more sanctions on that, but this is a little – some people were kind of surprised that the Trump administration was willing to come out and admit this. Well, in response, the Trump administration has kind of walked it back a little bit, and they're saying they're still extremely hard on Iran. They still have a lot of problems with what Iran is doing, and I think they're exactly right and make a lot of good points on this. And this is actually what Trump said about it this week. Go ahead and play Trump Cut 2 for me, Tom Benson, when you got it.
They are doing a tremendous disservice to an agreement that was signed. It was a terrible agreement. It shouldn't have been signed. It shouldn't have been negotiated the way it was negotiated. I'm all for agreements, but that was a bad one, as bad as I've ever seen negotiated. They are not living up to the spirit of the agreement.
All right, and he makes the point, and this is the point a lot of people have made, that even though they've kind of lived up to a lot of the agreement, they're not living up to the spirit of the agreement, and I'm going to get to what exactly that means in a second. Now, Rex Tillerson has also been talking about it, and even though he says Iran's living up to their side of the deal, they still do a lot of things that are bad, especially, funding terrorism, funding Hezbollah and other terrorist activities, which still are causing a lot of problem in Iraq and other places. And they're still testing missiles and still doing a lot of things that are very damaging that we should be concerned about. And I thought he actually made a really good point here on something in terms of why this whole Iran deal has been pretty much a disaster in a lot of ways. And this is what he said.
It is another example of buying off a power who has nuclear ambitions. We buy them off for a short period of time, and then someone has to deal with it later. We just don't see that that's a prudent way to be dealing with Iran, certainly not in the context of all of their other disruptive activities.
And I think he's exactly right, because in the context, yes, they're still doing a lot of other disruptive activities. They still have the infrastructure in place, so when the Iran deal expires, they can go back to what they were doing. And by the way, they're still enriching uranium. Not as much. They're keeping with the amount of the deal, but they're still doing it. And who knows if they're doing it even more. There's inspectors there, but there have been reports that they've hid a lot of things from the inspectors as well. And Marco Rubio was talking about this on Fox yesterday, and he actually made an excellent point, I think, on this whole Iran deal and why he say it's not just the fact that of Iran keeping up with the deal. It's the fact that the deal was bad to begin with. This is what he said.
It is a political agreement with the previous administration. There is now a new administration. Here are the steps that we want to see. And if these steps are not met, and that includes, I would include the sponsorship of terrorism and the construction and development of long-range missiles, not to mention lowering their enrichment capability, if not eliminating it altogether. If what they really want is nuclear energy, they don't need enrichment capability to do that. Our problem is not to get Iran to comply with the deal. Our problem is the deal itself and the fact that it allows them to retain for example, the ability to enrich uranium to the point to weapons grade eventually. They retain all of that capacity. Meanwhile, they continue to build out their long-range missile capacity.
So he's exactly right, because they do continue to build out and they do continue to invest in that and test those missiles. And by the way, who's giving them the technology to do that? Russia. What do you know, Russia? And who's helping North Korea as well? Russia. There you go. So Russia is definitely not our friends. Russia is still causing a lot of problems. Now, I'm going to get into a second, though, because Rubio's basically saying what Trump said in the campaign. Trump said this is a bad deal. We need to get rid of this deal. That's what Rubio's saying. The deal itself is bad. Who cares if they're keeping up with it? It was a bad deal. To begin with, it's giving them a ton of money to do other bad activities like a bribe, just like what Tillerson said. But what they're saying now is Iran isn't living up to the spirit of the deal. And by the way, I don't think Trump's going to be as hard on Iran as he says he is, and I'm going to tell you why in a sec. But according to according to an 8-page memorandum written earlier this month by Mark Dubowitz, who's the executive director of Washington-based Foundation for Defense of Democracies, he looked at the IAEA's own report from December of 2015 on Iran and why they're not living up to the spirit of the deal. These were the infractions he found. Iran deliberately exceeded heavy water limits of 130 metric tons in November 2016, despite receiving warnings from the IAEA. Beginning in the summer of 2016, senior Iranian officials began threatening to resume large-scale uranium enrichment if leaders felt the international community was not meeting its sanction relief obligations. In December 2015, IAEA report confirms that despite years of unwavering insistence, Tehran has an extensive nuclear weapons program until 2003, and certain activities continued until 2009. That same IAEA report revealed that Iran provided misleading information in certain cases and refused to answer some of the agency's most sensitive inquiries. So that's why, and that doesn't even include the missile tests that they're doing, the sponsoring of terrorism that they're doing, and still enriching uranium when they don't really need to, and a lot of other problems that they have been causing. So that's why they're not keeping up with the spirit of the deal. And the basic thing we have to learn about this is it's very hard to trust that regime anyway. They're saying that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, former president of Iran, is running again, and he might win again. So the hardliners in Iran might end up getting in power in there again, even though, the Ayatollah or whatever is the one who runs that place. But there's a whole bunch of issues with Iran, and we really can't trust them anyway, especially when you hear the rhetoric coming out of the leaders' mouths in terms of anti-American stuff and anti-West stuff.
Well, I was just going to say, how can you expect them to live up to the spirit of the agreement when they don't even have the same values as we do?
Yeah, exactly right. And then we're giving them billions of dollars now to do even more destructive stuff. That being said, this is why I don't think Trump's going to do much about it. This is according to NPR, and other sources have this as well. The deal has allowed many Western companies to resume business with Iran, including Boeing, which has signed 2 major agreements to deliver dozens of planes to Iran. It's all about money. And Trump, and he's not going to want to go after those jobs in Boeing and those factory things. And if these American companies put pressure on the Trump administration because they want to do business with Iran, it's going to make it extremely difficult to enforce any of this stuff on Iran. Now, Alan Dershowitz has a great piece on what this has to do with North Korea, and we're out of time in this hour, so hopefully I'll get to it in the next hour with a bunch of other stuff that we have to get to. That was a quick hour. So you'll have to stay tuned with me to the next hour as we get to even more of this stuff. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Nothing comes from indifference. I look at
So some breaking news from the Washington Post, actually coming from a couple hours ago that I just saw. They are saying that the University of California at Berkeley has reversed their decision on allowing Ann Coulter to do her event and her speech there. They are saying now that she will be allowed to speak. They originally canceled that event because of quote-unquote security concerns, but Ann Coulter said she was going to do it anyways. So she called their bluff, and apparently they are going to let her speak, and good. I think they should. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on until 9 p.m. tonight. We just did a whole hour. I did a whole hour on politics. And if you missed any of that show, you'll be able to catch the podcast of the show anywhere podcasts are available. We are on Facebook Live as well. So if you want to catch it out, you can like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page or just send me a friend request on Facebook and I will accept it. And you can follow me on Twitter at Beyond Reason R. So I talked about yesterday in dealing with the whole Bill O'Reilly thing and other things, and the whole Berkeley thing as well, how there are definitely some groups on the left who are using different arguments to basically shut down opinions they disagree with, who basically don't believe in the ideas of freedom of speech, especially on college campuses. They don't want platforms for things they disagree with. And it's getting even very extreme. You have the Antifa group who is going to these college campuses and basically starting violence to shut down things they disagree with. The irony of that, of course, is that is a very fascist thing to do. That is exactly what the brown shirts under Hitler did in fascist Germany. They would go out and they would beat up people they disagreed with. Well, this Antifa group who says they are anti-fascist are doing that very thing. But it's getting even worse than that. And I talked about how this is very troubling. Well, there's a story here I found on the Daily Wire and I actually went and got the letter. There were some black students at a college. It's called Pomona College in the Claremont colleges, and they sent a letter to the institution, to the head of the president of the college, because they are upset that a conservative, someone they disagree with, is going there to speak. Her name is Heather McDonald. And of course, what they say about her is a lie. They call her all these things that is not true. There is even a piece in the Atlantic that disagreed with them. The piece in the Atlantic said, the writer said, I don't agree with Heather McDonald on everything she says, but she's not all these things. But there's some things in this letter that are extremely troubling if you believe in the marketplace of ideas. These black students, they wrote here and they said, free speech. And by the way, that's what they said in their letter. They say, we black students, few of our black students are writing this letter. So that's why I say black student. They don't give their name. It says here, free speech, a right many freedom movements have fought for, has recently become a tool appropriated by hegemonic institutions. It has not just empowered students from marginalized backgrounds to voice their qualms and criticize aspects of the institution, but it has given those who seek to perpetuate systems of domination a platform to project their bigotry. Now, this is a lie. Heather McDonald doesn't believe in that, so they're lying. But what really gets disturbing is later. It says, thus, if our mission is founded upon the discovery of the truth, how does free speech uphold that value? The notion of discourse, when it comes to discussions about experiences and identities, deters the Columbusing of established realities and truths. This is where it gets troubling later in this article. It says, your statement contains unnuanced views surrounding the academy and a belief in searching for some venerated truth. So basically, the reason why they allow different views to go on their campus is because they say they believe in the search for truth. And the basic way you search for truth is you have different voices out there with different points of view, and you have people listen to those different points of view, and you search for truth. That is something that has been instrumental in Western society, has it not? Well, this is what they say about it. Those writing this letter against this person speaking says, historically, white supremacy has venerated the idea of objectivity and wielded a dichotomy of subjectivity versus objectivity as a means of silencing oppressed people. So what they're saying is they're using this search for truth, not really to search for the truth, but to oppress people or silence oppressed people. Now, the irony of this is the people who are writing this are the ones who really want to silence someone. Heather McDonald doesn't want to silence anyone. She just wants to speak. This is where it gets really troubling. They said the idea that there is a single truth, the truth, is a construct of the Euro-West that is deeply rooted in the Enlightenment, which was a movement that also described black and brown people as both subhuman and impervious to pain. What are they saying? Well, the idea of truth and the idea that there is a truth is a subject of Western civilization. And it's actually racist. It's promoted racism in the past, is what they're saying. It says this construction is a myth and white supremacy. So the idea of searching for the truth is actually a myth promoting white supremacy, is what they're saying. It says it's a myth, and white supremacy, imperialism, colonization, capitalism, and the United States of America are all of its progeny. You think these people like the United States of America when you read this? I don't think so. It says the idea that the truth is an entity for which we must search in matters that endanger our abilities to exist in open spaces is an attempt to silence oppressed people. So what they're saying is by inviting this person, Heather McDonald, as a conservative, they're really not wanting to search for truth, but they're wanting to use her to oppress minorities. Now, Heather McDonald has never called for the oppression of minorities, ever. But that's what they're saying. But now they're going to the direction of, well, there is no truth. Truth is a construct of the Enlightenment, and it's used to oppress people. Now, when you go back to the Enlightenment, what the Enlightenment in a lot of cases was all about was the idea of reason, that you could figure out the truth using reason. And the whole point of that was that you would search it out in the world, in science, in anything, and use your reason, use your knowledge, use your critical thinking skills to come up with different sides of truth. But that takes open curiosity of different points of view. They don't want different points of view. And by the way, they actually believe in a truth. They believe in their truth. And because they believe in their truth, they don't want to hear any different points of view. Now, I learned a lot about this in college. It's called postmodernism, the idea that truth is unknowable. Well, the idea that there is no truth, and if there is truth, truth is unknowable. But, of course, that statement, the underlying point of that statement is that that's a truth. So the idea that truth is unknowable is a truth in itself, and it gets very confusing, actually. But the whole idea is that everything is subjective. You can't know the truth. So what they're using that to silence someone. It says we are queer, trans, differently abled, poor, low income, undocumented, Muslim, first generation, and or immigrant, and positioned in different spaces across Africa and the African diaspora. The idea that we must subject ourselves routinely to the hate speech of fascists who want for us not to exist. Now, that's a lie. They obviously don't believe in the truth because they are just lying throughout this whole letter. The idea that we must subject ourselves routinely to the hate speech of fascists who want for us not to exist plays on the same Eurocentric constructs that believed black people to be impervious to pain and apathetic to the brutal and violent conditions of white supremacy. So just because you have someone who puts out a different point of view, and basically they don't like her because she's been critical of the Black Lives Matter movement. That's it. Now, because you're critical of that, does that mean you hate black people? No. it means you don't like a lot of what's going on in that movement.
I love you. I just don't love what you do.
Exactly. It says the idea that the search for this truth involves entertaining Heather McDonald hate speech is illogical. If engaged, Heather McDonald would not be debating on mere difference of opinion, but the right of black people to exist. Now, Heather McDonald has never, ever argued that black people should not exist. But this is where they go. Heather McDonald is a fascist, a white supremacist, a war hawk, a transphobe, a queerphobe, a classist, an ignorant of interlocking systems of domination that produce the lethal conditions under which oppressed people are forced to live. Why are you and other persons in positions of power at these institutions protecting a fascist and her hate speech and not students that are directly affected by her presence? How are they affected by her presence? If you don't like what she is saying, you have every right not to go. You have every right not to listen. This goes back to what I was saying yesterday. Their goal in these groups, their goal is not to win the battle of ideas. Their goal is to shut down the other side.
I wish there was some way to find out what these students like this, who have these thoughts, what they're majoring in college.
Yeah, I don't even know. Who even knows that they really go to the college?
That's true, too.
It says advocating for white supremacy and giving white supremacist platforms where form their toxic and deadly illogic may be disseminated is condoning violence against black people. The biggest problem I have with this, other than it's stupid, is it's not, they're lying about her. She's never done any of these things. And it's not condoning violence against black people. We're getting to the idea, and it's funny, they call her a fascist, yet she has never, ever called for the silencing of black people. Yet they're calling for the silencing of her.
Mm-hmm.
Which one is really fascist?
Yeah, exactly.
When we go down a road, I mean, that's like book burning road when you think about it. A lot of these dictatorial countries, what they do is they burn books because those books give ideas that cause dangers to society is what they believe. So they have to burn those books because those books and that speech, and all it is speech, is damaging to people. So they burn books. How is that really that much different than what this group is calling for? It says this is not an argument, it continues on in the letter, it says this is not an argument rooted in Heather's loss of free speech or academic freedom. She is a well-known public figure. Her views are well documented. Rather, our praxis is focused on not allowing her anti-black platform to be legitimized in front of an audience, which she does not have the right to. Engaging with her, a white supremacist fascist supporter of the police state, is a form of violence. How much is they going down this road? Even though the only ones who have been doing the violence are the left, the ones on their side. Speech is not a form of violence. But this is how you get to the point where you have those riots that you have in Berkeley. Because when you have this view that someone else giving their different point of view is the same as violence, then of course you're going to react in violence against them, and you're going to feel justified in doing it. So you wonder why the Antifa people are reacting in violence, because they have been told that those people giving a different point of view is the same as violence, even though it's not. It's absurd. So we're getting to a point now where we become so divided, but at least we were divided and we could be divided and argue, and that was it, and disagree. Now we're so divided that we don't only disagree, but we believe the other side should be shut down and silenced. Now, who's in charge of shutting down and silencing the other side? Well, usually it's the government, is it not? So eventually we get to the point where they give the government more power to do these things, to shut down the other side. That's what they're going to want. That's what their goal is. Make no mistake about it. If you read this, they hate the United States. They hate the idea that someone I mean, let's say she was saying really hateful things. Is it not her right to say hateful things? Now, it doesn't mean the college has to let her speak, but they want to silence any other points of view. That's their goal. How are we not heading towards a civil war when you believe in that? That's how civil wars start. Am I wrong on this? 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Listen to the latest episodes of Beyond Reason. Download the podcast at Spreaker.com. The place where we talk faith, culture, and politics. Beyond Reason Radio continues.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We go through everything in the news, everything in the world, everything in the culture that is beyond reason. And then I apply a voice of reason, a voice of truth, if I can say that word, to it all. By the way, they attack the Enlightenment as the Enlightenment was what resulted in slavery and saying African Americans are inhuman and all that stuff. Slavery existed way before the Enlightenment. In fact, the Enlightenment is a big reason why that big thing that led to the American Revolution. And if you read the words of a lot of the founders of this country, even the founders who owned slaves, believe it or not, they understood that American values and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence did not jive with slavery. And they understood that it would have to be getting rid of in the country eventually. Even founders who owned slaves understood that, no, using reason, you cannot support slavery in a free society. So there's a lot of misunderstandings, but it's just a lot of hatefulness. Those who are just joining me, I was reading a letter that went out to a college from some black students, went out to a Poamoa college, and they were saying, one, that the search for truth is in a lot of ways racist. This is what they said. White supremacy has venerated the idea of objectivity and wielded a dichotomy of subjectivity versus objectivity as a means of silencing oppressed people. It says the idea that there is a single truth, the truth, is a construct of the Euro West that is deeply rooted in the Enlightenment, which was a movement that also described black and brown people as both subhuman and impervious to pain. The construction is a myth, and white supremacy, imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, and the United States of America are all its progeny. The idea that truth is an entity for which we must search in matters that endanger our abilities to exist in open spaces is an attempt to silence oppressed people. Now, that the idea that there is a single truth as a construct of the Euro West is completely absurd. All you have to do is read the Bible, which is way before the Enlightenment. And Jesus often used the words truth. And I'm the way, the truth, and the life. That comes way before the Bible. But they're saying, you can't really search for the truth because there is no single truth. And so because of that, you have to silence people who you disagree with. Even if it's in the name of searching for the truth, they need to be silenced. And this is where we're headed. And you think we're not headed toward a civil war with that kind of stuff? Because eventually, those who are being silenced are going to want to fight back. Now, I found this article from thefederalist.com by John Daniel Davidson. Makes an interesting point. Says, for the sake of campus protesters and their professors across the country, it's time to make something clear. There's no such thing as hate speech. Oh, those who wrote the letter aren't going to like that. He said that should go without saying, since freedom of speech and free inquiry is supposed to be what college is all about. But the recent spat of violent student protests from the University of California at Berkeley to Middlebury College in Vermont have been met with a collective shrug from an alarming number of college students, professors, and administrators who seem to be under the impression that violence is okay so long as its purpose is to silence hate speech. It says, by hate speech, They mean ideas and opinions that run afoul of progressive piety. Is exactly what I've been saying. Do you believe abortion is taking a human life? That's hate speech. Think transgenderism is a form of mental illness? Hate speech. Concerned about illegal immigration? Believe in the right to bear arms? Support President Donald Trump? All considered hate speech. And you know how that's true? Because they said similar things when I read that letter earlier.
Mm-hmm.
He continues on here. He says, but in fact, there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. The answer to the question, where does free speech stop and hate speech begin, is this: nowhere. For the purposes of the First Amendment, there is no difference between free speech and hate speech. Ideas and opinions that progressive students and professors find offensive or hateful are just as protected by the Bill of Rights as anti-Trump slogans chanted at a campus protest. He continues on. He says, there are, of course, certain kinds of speech that are not protected by the First Amendment, but those have nothing to do with hate speech, which has no legal definition. For example, there's an exception for fighting words, which the courts have defined as face-to-face insult directed at a specific purpose for the person for the purpose of provoking a fight. He also talks about how, there are speech in terms of shouting fire in a crowded theater, but that is not the same as what's going on here. And he also admits that those restrictions, like shouting fire, apply to everyone at all times, not just those whom campus protesters believe are engaging in hate speech. He continues on later. He says, shutting down free speech with violence is becoming commonplace on college campuses across the country. Instead of cracking down on violent protests, college administrators are simply canceling controversial events, giving into the hecklers or rioters' veto. Now, we talked about how they canceled the event at Van Coulter, but I just mentioned at the top of the hour that they actually reversed that. It says, but the student editors at UC Berkeley, like the Wesley College editors who recently warned that politically incorrect speech should be met with hostility, have no idea what free speech is. They believe free speech is only for certain people with certain ideas. Everything else is hate speech, and anyone engaging in it should be muzzled by force if necessary. This is a dangerous trend. I'm telling you, and we're seeing it more and more. Our college students have come to this impasse in large part because their parents, high school teachers, college professors, and school officials have all failed them. They have not only refused to instill in them a reverence for the First Amendment, they have taught them to despise the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the very things that protect their right to protest. In so doing, they have turned them into the thing they claim to despise most, fascists. It's very true. And, we also see this when it comes to the First Amendment and religious freedom. Because now you have these groups, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, who they don't want just separation of church and state. They want to ban religious practice and religious speech in the public square. Anytime they're anytime a government official does anything religious, says anything religious in a school or anywhere else, they want to silence it because it might offend some people. Is that really a belief in the First Amendment, the belief of free speech and the freedom to practice your religion? Doesn't seem like it to me. But the real problem that they don't realize what they're doing is they're creating conflict. So if they disagree with someone and protest someone, that's one thing. You can disagree and you can convince people to go to your side. But what happens when you start these violent protests is you are asking for violence in return. And that's what's happening now. And my warning to the right as well is let's not become like them. That's another thing I worry about because there's going to be people, mostly on the alt-right. The alt-right are the ones that are doing this. But there are going to be people on the other side who want to silence the left. And I have no desire to silence them. I want to defeat them in the marketplace of ideas, but I don't want to silence them. I would never call for the silencing of them. I went to college and got a religious studies degree. I'm a strong Christian, and I often heard things from professors that I obviously disagreed with in my religious studies classes. But I wanted to hear things I disagreed with because I wanted my views to be challenged because it helps you think critically. I would never have called for silencing those professors just because I disagreed with them. And yet that's basically what these protesters are doing in a lot of situations. How can you ever learn anything? You can't. 407-916-5400. Text to 23680. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you like Beyond Reason Radio, well, make sure to show it by liking the Facebook page at facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. Your safe space for conservative thought, not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
All right, so I'm actually going to move on to a completely different topic. If you miss any of the shows so far, we've covered a lot of things. I covered a lot of political things in the first hour. We've been on since 7 o'clock if you're listening to the live show. If you missed any of that, check out the podcast anywhere podcasts are available. We're also on Facebook Live as well. I posted the video of the first hour on Facebook. You can like us on Facebook at Beyond Reason Radio, or you can follow me on Twitter at Beyond Reason R. Go to BeyondReasonRadio.com. A whole bunch of places to find the show. We're on until 9 p.m. tonight. And, I found this article. There's certain people out there that you read and they're just full of so much truth and common sense. I read Mike Rowe. He's one of those people out there that I read one of his pieces earlier. But another guy I've really begun to like, and he's another guy, I think he's my age, around my age. And he worked for The Blaze. He used to have a radio show. I think he does a podcast every now and then. But his name is Matt Walsh. And I always find his stuff. And he talks, and one thing I really like about his stuff is he'll address things that have nothing to do with like Trump and politics, and he'll just talk about the culture a lot. And I really like that. And I've been trying to address that more in this show because I think it's very important. And I found this article, and I'm going to read it. Very interesting. I think there's a lot of truth to it. Although, I wonder what people are going to think about me reading this because I'm not married. Never been married. Here's the title. And so you've been married for a long time, Tom Benson.
I have indeed.
So you might have an opinion on this and see if you agree with this. I'm sure you will. I'm pretty sure you will. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will. The piece here says, from Matt Walsh, he says, I didn't fall in love with my wife. I didn't fall in love with my wife. Now, you read that, it's pretty controversial. It's not something you might want to say to your wife a lot of times these days. But when you actually read what he's saying, it makes so much sense. And I see this all the time in my generation. Not just in marriage, but just in relationships in general. He says, it's no surprise that we are so bad at marriage in this culture. He says, we're bad at it because we don't understand it. And we don't understand it because we don't understand love. He says, you can't forge a lasting marriage if all you know about love is what you learned from the Ed Sheeran song. It's like trying to build a car when you think engines run on fairy dust. And that's essentially how many of us approach marriage. He says, we believe it's fueled by some intense and mystical emotional force, a force we inaccurately call love. And as soon as we run out of this mystical, mysterious cosmic gasoline, all we can do is send it to the scrapyard and find a new model.
There's a difference between love and lust.
Well, that's true. But I even think there are people in relationships that, even beyond lust, they still believe it's like this mystical experience. And, I think this is, and this kind of just came to me now, this is not only true in relationships, but this is also true in our spirituality. When in terms of loving God and loving Christ and loving Jesus, we believe it's like a mystical experience. And it's more than that. It's entrusting yourself to it. It's a decision. It's a lifestyle. And that's kind of what he's going here in relationships. It shows how we can learn a lot from the Bible and use those beliefs in the Bible to and also apply them to our relationships in marriage. In fact, Paul talks about that in the Bible. But he continues on here. He says, This view is popular in our society because it removes all responsibility and blame from the individual. Marriage is presented as a passive endeavor, established and destroyed by forces outside our control. Love is something you fall into, like a puddle, and then out of it, like an unsafe carnival ride. And there's not much you can really do to cause the one or prevent the other. These things happen, we say. Oops, I'm married. Oops, I'm having an affair. Oops, I'm divorced. Oops, I'm married again. Oops, I'm divorced again. Oops, I'm lonely and isolated and everyone I know, ever known, resents me. Oops. But he says, but here's the reality. These were our choices every step of the way. And that state which we found ourselves falling in and out of is not real love. Real love is an act of will, a decision, a conscious activity. It is something you do and live. Love is chosen, and if it is protected and nurtured, it grows. Love is sacrifice. Love is effort. Love is everything St. Paul describes in 1 Corinthians and especially in Ephesians 5. That's interesting. I talked about that earlier. Then he brings it up. He says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy. Love is dying to the self. Love is many things, and none of them happen by accident. He says even people who understand this will still sometimes talk about love in a way that contributes to the confusion. A married couple may describe the moment they, quote, fell in love very early on in their relationship, well before they walked down the aisle. They may even claim to have experienced love at first sight. This is all fine fodder for Hallmark cards and Nicholas Sparks novels, which, as we know, are based on Hallmark cards. But it doesn't actually make sense. Far be it for me to make this determination, but no, you didn't love your wife the moment you laid eyes on her. You thought she was hot, sure, but that's not the same thing. Says, I can say with certainty that I love my wife now. I can also say that I did not love her a week after I met her. I surely didn't love her the first time I saw her. I thought she was beautiful. I liked a lot of things about her, but love her? No. How could I? I didn't know her. I made no commitment to her. I wasn't sharing my life with her. I wasn't really sharing anything with her except for an appetizer at Chili's. Is that where their first date was, Chili's? Yeah. And you can do better than that, Matt Walsh. Come on now. Yes, I loved her as a child of God in the same sense that I'm obligated to love all humanity, but I didn't love her in the way that I love her now. I couldn't have. This love, the love we have now, is defined by commitment, sacrifice, and devotion. And none of those dimensions are present when you're just dating someone. He says it's more accurate to say when we first met, I was infatuated with her. Oh, I've had that. I've been infatuated with people, but I've had people infatuated with me. And trust me, that infatuation can die just as quickly as it can come about. Says there was an intense, mostly selfish attachment. I wasn't being intentionally selfish. It just made me feel good to be around her, so I tried to be around her as much as possible. That's what I liked most about her at this stage, how she made me feel. I didn't love her for her own sake, but for my sake. I think every relationship must start this way, but it can't survive if it stays this way. And this is a very long piece, so I don't want to read the whole thing, but I'll continue on here. He says, most commonly, of course, people will stay together so long as this infatuation lasts. That's how you end up with a generation of 20 and 30-somethings who've never been married but think they've had deep, rich love for like 19 different people. In truth, they've never loved anyone. They simply experience a fleeting enthusiasm over and over again. They've fallen into an infatuation many times. They've never once chosen love. So that's the thing about marital love. It's willful and decisive, but it also requires boldness and courage because you won't have it in its realest sense until after you've already gotten married. You say at the altar, not that you have loved or did love your betrothed, but that you will. You're choosing love right then and there, despite not knowing them very well. After all, even if you date for a couple of years before marriage, which I don't necessarily recommend, you still won't know your future spouse with even a fraction of the depth and intimacy that you'll know them 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years of marriage. You know them only as a separate person, not as a person united with yourself until death. Yet you chose love anyways, and you're bound by that choice forever. This is the great power and mystery of the sacrament. He continues on later. He says, inevitably, if we approach marriage like hormonal teenagers, we will see the emotional dry season as an indication that we've fallen out of love. We won't fight for our marriage or remain committed to our spouses because we think the whole point of our union was the emotional high it gives us. By the way, this is so true with spiritual things as well. Everything I'm reading, it's also true of your relationship with God. It really is. I see people have that spiritual high with God when they first come to him, and then it goes away and they think, oh, well, it was not real. Well, it wasn't real because love isn't just based on that. So now it's gone, and we don't know why, and we can't do anything about it. We're utterly helpless. Love was like a magical elf that stayed with us for a while, then scurried suddenly away, and all we can do is say farewell as it disappeared into the woods. Wave goodbye to our love, honey. It's leaving now. Welp, time to get divorced. He says, naturally, this mentality also leads quickly to affairs. If love just happens, then who is to say it won't happen with your coworker or someone you met at the gym? And this makes so much sense. It says if pursuing this love means dissolving your current family, well, then it's the right thing to do. The loving thing, even. The kids will understand. He says, he ends here, and he says, for my part, I know I owe my love to my kids and my wife, but nobody is more entitled to it, to me, all of me, than my wife. I am in debt to her. I promised her my love, and I am called to fulfill that promise. True, it's easy now. She's a beautiful person through and through, so holding up my end of the bargain is not a chore. But if those were conditions for my love, if I only intended to love her as long as she can stun me with her grace and beauty, then I would not love her at all. I would be a mercenary in it just to get mine for as long as it remains profitable. That's a fine approach to business, but it's just not how marriage is supposed to work. What do you guys think about? What do you think about that, Tom Benson? Because I'm not married, so I'm still learning a lot about this.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm 30, I'm still trying to learn this and trying to understand this.
Mm-hmm. I think in my particular case, the respect grew during the years of marriage, and that strengthens love.
I agree. That makes sense. Good take there. Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to learn about this. I could be wrong. I've definitely made mistakes in this area of my life, but I read that and it just makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the commitment thing. We don't believe in commitment anymore, it seems like, because we want to feel good in the moment. So when you have a society that believes that feeling good in the moment is above all else, how can you commit to something like marriage? Because marriage is not going to always be filled with feeling good in the moment. There's no way it can be. It's impossible.
And for most people, you don't realize, because you're usually young and you don't have that depth of perception yet, that when you get married, you take an oath in front of God.
Yeah, yeah, and the best advice I ever got on this subject, on marriage, came from my pastor years ago. And he said, too much in relationships, you have the man and the woman, the husband and the wife, and they just look towards each other and they try to go straight towards each other in a line, and they think that's going to work. But he says that'll never work because people are imperfect. So if you just rely only on each other, it will never work, because they're inevitably going to let you down at some point, because we're imperfect people. Mm-hmm. But if both of those people, the man and woman, look towards God and build their relationship with God and try to get closer to God and be more Christ-like in their lives, the more both of them do that, they're both moving up towards God, and as they both move up towards God, they also move closer to each other. Like moving up a triangle. Mm-hmm. You move up, you both move towards God, you also both move closer to each other. And that's how it should be. And I saw that, and my pastor told me, and I said, that makes more sense to me than anything. We're too busy looking towards each other for the solutions when the solution is looking up towards God, looking up towards that idea, looking up towards, dare I say, truth. 407-916-5400, text to 23680. Speaking of commitment, I have an interesting little article for something that made me laughy, made Yaffee laughy. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime. Your voice of truth in a world of fake news. Beyond Reason Radio continues right now.
I don't know if I want to take this call. Maybe it'll make me laughy. It was supposed to be the Yaffee Laffy segment. I had a great article about why you should have kids. I really should read it to my brother and his wife because they won't have kids, and they should. I don't have kids because I'm not married, so maybe I shouldn't read it because what do I know? But it's actually really funny. But let's take this call. Ann in Orlando, what's your comment? Welcome to Beyond Reason Radio.
Hello.
Yes. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I wanted to ask you a question. I love your show, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
And I wanted to ask you if you felt like we have some sort of debt to pay to the American Indians and African Americans due to slavery, because they apparently think that we have such a debt. What do you think?
Wow, this is like completely off topic and a whole nother thing. I thought you were going to comment about the love thing. I mean, you mean like reparations?
Yeah, there's a story out today about,
Yeah, I saw that story. And that is, appreciate your calling. It's really off topic. It's a whole nother show. No, I don't believe in reparations. I understand that the African community has had a lot of problems in our society. But, I mean, how would that help? That just makes them more dependent on the government. And, I have not owned any slaves, personally. So I should pay reparations for something my ancestors did. I mean, we'll never move past racism if we get to that point. But okay, forget that. That was completely off topic. Sorry, Ann. But I thought you was going to comment on the love thing. But yes. It is time, that part of the show. Well, here it is. I have no time to get to this thing now because of that caller, but I guess that caller may be what made us laugh. Yeah, maybe I'll have to get to it next week. One thing that did make me laugh, though, I don't know if you saw this, Tom Benson. What did you see the thing with Gronkowski at the White House?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
He walked in and he goes, "Need any help?" And you could tell Sean Spicer was totally taken off guard.
Oh, sure. Who would expect that to happen? And how can you just walk in on that without getting past Secret Service or other people who are, guarding the door, so to speak?
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a nice, interesting, entertaining way to end the show. If you missed any of the show, that was Beyond Reason of what it was. It was Beyond Reason. If you missed any of the show so far, you can catch the podcast of the show anywhere podcasts are available. I will be back next week. I want you all to have a good night, a good weekend. Well, make sure to push the share button, too, when you have a podcast. And, I'll catch you guys next time.